C.S. Lewis said that if you read this book and you have some sense of what Boethius is talking about, then you are at home in the Middle Ages, that you understand something about medieval times. He said this is the book that if you can get some grasp of what's going on, you kind of have a sense of what the Middle Ages was like. So let's review what we talked about so far. We started with the fall. We started with Paradise Lost, the fall of humanity, how we were plunged into sickness and death through the sin of our first parents, Adam and Eve. And then we went from that to the Confessions. Why look at the Confessions? Well, Augustine does a pretty good job relating the seriousness of sin, of conveying perhaps just how far we might have fallen with our sin. And then we went from the Confessions to Hamlet. Why look at Hamlet? Well, Hamlet is a great expression of what life is like in a fallen world and the attempt to find meaning in a fallen world. Because when you think about it, if this weren't a fallen world, you wouldn't have to find meaning. You wouldn't have to find purpose. That would all be taken care of. But with sin, not only are our desires and our emotions turned away from God, but our minds get warped so that things that we thought were obvious truths suddenly become obscure. So the main point that we got out of Hamlet was his lament, his to be or not to be speech. So Hamlet says, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. What is Hamlet's answer to the question, to be or not to be? What's his solution? What does he ultimately arrive at? Because it's quite, I don't know, it's like expecting a great present and getting a piece of dirt. Yes? Right. Basically, his idea is, I don't like my life, but for all I know, if I end my life, the afterlife will be much worse. So why don't I play it safe and continue to trudge through this daily existence, because who knows what waits me on the other side? Can you imagine a more depressing reply to the question, to be or not to be? Hamlet doesn't have the solution. He doesn't have the answer to the question, what's the point? What's the purpose? What's the meaning of existing in a fallen world? So Boethius is going to be our first reply to Hamlet. First part of our answer is going to be two parts. Boethius is just the first part. We'll see he doesn't answer the whole question, but he gets us started on the right path. The reason Hamlet has so much trouble is because he doesn't know what humans are good for. He doesn't know what our purpose is. And it sounds strange, but maybe the reason he doesn't know what humans are good for is because he doesn't know what makes something legitimately human, what distinguishes us from the rest of the world, from the rest of the created order. And until he acquires that knowledge, which he doesn't in the play, he's just going to keep asking, to be or not to be. That is the question. So that's the question we're going to be looking at. What are we good for as human beings? What does the good life look like for us? And usually when we ask this question, you think, okay, what is God calling me to do? What are my talents? What can I contribute? But don't think in those terms. We're asking a more general question. Because even if the good life for you, and most likely it doesn't include becoming a philosophy professor, because we're both human, both of our lives, when they are good, will overlap significantly. There'll be things that we have in common because we both share the same nature, because we're both created in the image of God. So it's not that the good life for anyone can be completely unique, completely unlike anyone else's life. To the extent that you have a good life, to the extent that I have a good life, there will be overlap between yours and mine. And we need to figure out what that overlap is. Now, as a Christian, you've got an obvious answer, right? Glorifying God and enjoying Him forever. And we're not going to come up with a different answer. What we're going to do is arrive at that answer through a different route. Instead of just getting that answer from up on high from the Bible, we're going to work our way from the bottom upward. Because the Bible says all sorts of true things, but sometimes we don't understand the logic or the reasons behind them. So what if the Bible says, yeah, your good is God and glorifying God? What if that's true, but we could also figure out why God says that in the first place? Why it's not an arbitrary command? That might help us understand it a little better. And that's what we're trying to do with Boethius. Okay. So think about it. When God creates the world, He doesn't just create things and then at the end say, okay, this is what I want these things to do. This is what I want roses to do. This is what I want water to do. This is what I want humans to do. He creates us. He creates things with our purpose built in, already there. Which means if we figure out what we are, what makes us human, maybe we'll be able to extract that purpose that's already built in, that God built in when He created us. Because there's something very strange about goodness that will help us see this point. The way the medievals and the ancients thought about goodness is completely unlike the way we think about goodness. By the way, I typed into Google strange things, and this is the dog that showed up. So that's going to be my picture. I don't know. Maybe it's because of the eyes or whatever, but that's my strange thing. So the strange thing about goodness. Boethius, Augustine, they thought of goodness in a different way than you and I think about it. Here's how we tend to think about it. We think there's moral goodness and goodness for human beings. There's good and evil. There's right and wrong. And then there's all this other kind of goodness that applies to all sorts of other things. Because when you think about it, we call all sorts of things good. We call toasters good, cars good, a bed good. A blender can be a good blender. A good glove, a good basketball, a good heart, and I mean physically a good heart, one that functions well, good lungs, good digestion, good health, a good God, good friends. Notice that this word good is applied to everything in the world. And what we normally say is, okay, when we talk about good blenders, what we're talking about really has nothing to do with being a good human. Has nothing to do with being moral. Morality deals with things like whether you should lie or not. It doesn't come up when you're eating breakfast. But toasters are good, not morally, but in some other sense. It's almost like we treat goodness the way we treat the word bank. The word bank we can use to mean a financial institution or the edge of a river, right? And those two have nothing to do with each other. But maybe, as Boethius and Augustine would say, maybe the goodness of a toaster has a lot to do with what it is to be a good human. And that's because things aren't simply good or bad. So this is, let's see, letter C, capital C, on the outline. Number 2. Things aren't simply good or bad. They're good or bad as something or other. So a toaster is not just good, it's good as a toaster. A heart, your heart, is not simply good, It's good at being a heart, which is pumping blood. To be a good pianist is not to be someone who's a pianist and also good. It's to be good as a pianist. You see, things aren't simply good or bad. They're good or bad as something or other, which is why you can be a good pianist and a deplorable human being. You're good as a pianist, but you're bad as a human. So if toasters can be good, and beds can be good, and hearts can be good, and they're good as something or other, maybe that's the way it applies to humans. To be a good human is not to be a human being and good, but to be good as a human being, to fulfill your purpose, to flourish, to function. Which means that when we talk about people being good or things being good, goodness is not something that just kind of floats around and lands on some toasters and some microwaves and other appliances and lands on some cars and lands on some people. It's all connected to the sort of thing it is.